Hello, thank you so much for dropping by this video. This is in response to a question. My name is Arthur, by the way. I have many, many, many addictions, which by grace I have recovered from them. They've been lifted from me. And this is in response to a question: how do I break an addiction? So, um, first and foremost, you have to decide that you want to stop. You have to get sick and tired of it. And usually it's you're sick and tired of the consequences of the addiction. So this person is probably already at that point. And anyone watching this video, they're probably either thinking about or they really want to stop, but they don't know how. So, um, so if you want to, it's like you want to keep doing your addiction, this video isn't really for you. But if you're like, I want to stop, okay, good. Then how to stop? So once you decide you want to stop, then the next thing is to get really clear what kind of addiction you have. So the model I use, which has been really helpful, is a kind of a three-tiered model of addiction. So first and foremost, there are you could call a problem, and it's really not an addiction, but it's just someone who drinks too much, and then they realize that, and they're like, oh, I'm drinking too much. For example, there's someone I know, and he was overeating a lot, like all the time, and he was starting to put on weight. And then one day he's like, just doesn't feel good. I don't like how my body feels. It's bad for my health. But he'd been doing it for, maybe a year, where he was just overeating and not eating well. And he's like, God, this is not good for me. And he just stopped. And it was pretty effortless for him to stop. And he eats healthy now and he exercises, and that was that. So that's the kind of the lowest level. That's not even really an addiction. You could call that someone with a problem. And with a little willpower and a little lifestyle change, someone's able to change that. So then the next level you could call a hard addiction. And by addiction here, I'm talking about any behavior which is having negative repercussions, and yet it's hard to stop. Not just hard, really hard. And so that brings us to the second layer, a hard addiction. So this would be someone who is really damaging themselves or their lives, but with a good reason, such as potential loss of a relationship, potential a health problem, a doctor giving them a warning, possible loss of work, or maybe they get a DUI, and they're just able to say no. So this is actually, I can say that I do have one hard addiction, and that is to drugs. I call the ones I used, I call them plant medicines, such as ayahuasca, marijuana. So those things had started to have a negative impact on my life, and they started to not feel good, but I just kept doing them. And then I did mushrooms once, and I feel like I almost had a psychotic break. And after that, it took a little bit of willpower. I basically felt like I almost went crazy. And after that, I did a couple more times. I did marijuana, and every time afterwards, I would be really depressed. And I was like, this has got to stop. And then I did it again. And I'm like, this has got to stop. And then I did it again. I'm like, this has got to stop. And I stopped. I was like, I'm going to really go crazy if I keep this up. So it wasn't a doctor who gave me that diagnosis, but it was me. And while it was difficult, I was able to stop. And I still feel tempted sometimes. But since then, I haven't. But I still kind of feel the little call. So it still requires some willpower, but I am able to use my willpower to stop on this. So that's not really a severe hard addiction, but that's a good example of it. Really, it took some effort and it wasn't easy. And what it took was dire consequences. Because the truth is, it's been having a negative consequence for a long time. but it took a really dire consequence of literally almost going crazy to that I was like, whoa. And even then, it wasn't easy. And it still isn't easy because it still kind of tugs at me and calls at me. So that's what you could call a hard addiction, someone who can still use willpower. So a problem, a hard addiction, and then and then a real, there you go, a problem addiction, a hard, which isn't really an addiction, but just a problem behavior, a hard addiction, and then a real addiction. So I can speak from experience on this because I have multiple behaviors that are real addictions: pornography, internet binging, compulsive overeating, undereating, uh, various sexual addictions, which I'm above and beyond pornography, which I'm not going to get into live here on this channel, but and also relationships. I have this crazy addiction to unhealthy relationships. It's nuts. It's almost killed me, actually. So everything I have tried for every one of those things, I've been unable to stop using willpower. With the drugs, with the plant medicines, I was able to use willpower once there was a sufficient reason. There's a very sufficient reason with food, computer, pornography, relationship, sexual, all those addictions. Very sufficient reason, but my willpower is not sufficient. I literally can't stop my own willpower. So the way that the addiction was stopped was through working the original 12 steps, which I'll speak about a little bit in a moment. But before we go there, to the person who asked this question, or anyone who is looking at the issue of addiction, the first thing you have to figure out is what kind of an addict are you? Like how can you use your willpower or not? Because that's going to determine which approach you take. If you have a hard addiction, your willpower plus motivation will be sufficient. If you're a real addict, which as I've shared, I can speak from experience, I will do those addictive behaviors into the grave. Willpower is not sufficient. So there's some experiments you can do to find out which kind you are. You can just decide to stop and watch what happens. If you're a real addict, no matter how strongly you determine to stop, no matter how intense the negative consequences, what will happen to you if you're a real addict, I'm not saying this will happen if you're a hard addict, but if you're a real addict like me, a life or death addict, at a certain point, you'll forget. You'll forget the negative consequences. And not only that, you don't just take one drink. One drink leads to another, leads to another, leads to an out-of-control drinking binge. Drinking, drugging, sexing, eating, computer, pornography, whatever the addiction is, you're not able to moderate. Someone with a heart addiction can moderate. Like I could probably get away with smoking marijuana once a year and it wouldn't set off a spree. I choose not to, but a real addict, they can't moderate. They use once, and then they use again, and they use again, and next thing you know, they're off they're out of control. Out of freaking control. And that's, so it requires some honesty to really look at yourself. So beautiful question. Thank you so much for asking. Very open to comments on this video and very available to help anyone in any way I can on this journey. Because if you have a real addiction, it's a deadly illness. And I was saved by it through the original 12-step program, which this whole channel is about. Not program, the original 12-step process. And it's my deepest joy. It's my deepest joy to help others save their lives. Thank you so much for dropping by this video. And again, very open to comments, feedbacks, questions, and you're welcome to share your experience. Take care.